Ubisoft has had a general meeting for this year, and we've got a lot of things to talk about in here. Uh, as you can see, it's called Assembly General. I don't know. I don't know what is how you say it, but there's been a lot of interesting points raised. But the thing is, it's in French.
Available at the meeting venue in electronic or paper format as applicable. The AGM.
Yeah, so we got the big guy from Ubisoft. What's his name? Yves something something. I forgot his name. Yeah, he's talking to all the investors and he's going through all the financially stuff. It's pretty boring stuff for us average gamers, to be honest. But he talks about how things performed, and especially games like Avatar, Star Wars Outlaws, and Assassin's Creed Shadows. They get into a lot of topics about the wokeness in games, which is really interesting. Obviously, I mean, if you look
Can
at
you
it,
please just give us a final figure for that and current sales as they stand? So that's my first question. Second,
Yeah.
Star Wars Outlaws.
yeah,
What have you learned from the failure?
yeah. So as you can see, they get grilled from the investors who's got a lot of stakes in their company. Um, so I mean, if you're into this kind of stuff, you'll find this really interesting. But I'm not gonna go through this video, which is 2 hours long. But we'll just stick to the articles that's been written based on this meeting, and I'll take you through some of the things that stood out to me. First of all, they were talking about the Stop Killing Games petition, which is I'm looking at an article right now that's from the GameIndustry.biz website with the title "Nothing is written in stone. Ubisoft head response to Stop Killing Games petition." Yeah, so this is written by Lewis Packwood. Ubisoft held its annual shareholders meeting in Paris in July 10, and as reported by Stefan Tortillo at GameFile, blah, blah, blah. The petition, which calls for the game companies to allow games to remain playable after official publisher support has ended, had surpassed million signatures ahead of the shareholder meeting, prompting a response from Video Games Europe. Ubisoft shutdown of the online racing game The Crew in early 2024 caused particular consternation, resulting in class action lawsuit in California in November 2024. Ubisoft filed for a dismissal of the case in April this year. During the Q&A portion of the Ubisoft July meeting, an angry shareholder took the opportunity to take Guillemot to task. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. First, they asked him about Assassin's Creed Shadows, which starts the real-life 16th century African samurai Yasuke. The questioner said there's been a lot of controversy regarding the game, adding that Ubisoft has been accused and criticized for this wokeist trend. So woke or no woke, he continued. How do you explain Ubisoft's deteriorated reputation, which may actually challenge the foundations of your organization? Or are you going to backtrack or backpedal on this leftist political agenda? Is there room for the entertainment world for that kind of stance? So yeah, they talk about there's a lot of frustration behind game shutdowns and paid content and the wokeist agendas in Ubisoft games lately. And then he also continues to ask about Stop Killing Games petitions, citing The Crew specifically. Do you support the petition? At the end of the day, when players buy an Ubisoft game, do they own it? Or is there a chance that they might no longer be able to play the game years later? So to this, he responded, the big guy at the Ubisoft responded, pointing out that Yasuke was someone who existed in real life. We already knew that. And showcasing that character has been extremely successful. And that is why we decided to tell the story. In regards to the second question, he noted Ubisoft provides information on how long a game can be played and that players are forewarned when a game is about to be discontinued. He's basically saying, you provide a service, but nothing is written in stone, and at some point the service may be discontinued. Nothing is eternal, and we are doing our best to make sure that things go well for all players and buyers, because obviously support for all gamers cannot last forever. Yeah, so he's basically saying stuff that's kind of dodging the question. The Stop Killing Games movement has been about game preservation of all things. I mean, it is about making sure the games do last beyond the service period. So especially when it comes to games that are single player, that can be played single player and doesn't have to be online. Example, The Crew. It does make sense. But obviously, him being a businessman, he's dodging the question for sure. Which is not fine, but expected. It's to be expected. Interesting take. I mean, it's an expected take on Ubisoft on this point. They have already expressed their discomfort and dislike towards the game preservation side of things, and I mean the whole reason why this movement, Stop Killing Games movement, sparked was because of a shutdown of one of their games, which is The Crew. Yeah, and that's basically about that. I was looking at another piece of content which focuses on Star Wars, like I mentioned before. What the Ubisoft comments on Star Wars Outlaws, why that was a financial flop. So, according to Game Rant, and they're reporting on this general meeting as well, they're saying US Gilmore was met with several questions about struggling sales of Star Wars Outlaws at a recent shareholder meeting. The company didn't name any specific goals for the game, but he did confirm, for Star Wars Outlaws, we didn't reach sales targets. As to why, the game suffered from a number of items. First, it suffered from the fact that it was released at a time when the brand that it belonged to was in a bit of choppy waters. And the game that had a few items that still needed to be polished, and they were polished and debugged in the early weeks, but it did affect sales volumes. Okay, so this obviously goes back to a lot of things. So let's start with that first comment. The game suffered from a number of items. He's basically referring to all the bugs and glitches that had in the game, basically saying that they shipped out a game that wasn't finished, that wasn't ready for prime time. He admits that. And then he's also blaming the fact that back when the game got released, Star Wars IP has been in choppy waters. I mean, I don't know if you remember, this is the time, this time last year when the game was coming out, the whole TV show Acolyte was in hot waters because of how shitty it was. I mean, if you remember, it was a bad watch. And people were commenting that Star Wars IP is dead, and Disney has kind of milked it out, and it's all downhill from there. And yeah, it was a shitty time, to be fair. But I don't think the game performed really bad because Star Wars people were watching a shitty Star Wars show. It doesn't make sense. If the game was pretty good, people would have played it, because it would have been even better, because it was released at a bad time when Star Wars TV show was doing really bad and people were saying shit about it. Imagine if this game was so good that people, oh my god, the game is doing better than TV shows now, would have gotten behind it. But the hard truth is, this game was also bad, so people just didn't buy it. So It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the truth. The game shipped in a bad state. It had a lot of bugs and glitches. It was made by massive games, which, if you know, they are the developers behind the Division. They make online third-person shooter games. So the online shooters. So this was a massive departure from what they used to make. So it kind of makes sense, and it kind of showed in the final product that shipped for Star Wars Outlaws, and they also were expected to make Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which came out the year before. So they basically were working on 2 action adventure games, 2 open world games that they're not used to making, Avatar and then Star Wars Outlaws back to back. At some point they would have had to rush it. I think, I'm not really sure, but I think Avatar was supposed to come a bit earlier than when it did, but obviously they got delayed. If you look at when was it supposed to come out? Yeah, 7th of December 2023, and Star Wars Outlaws release date 30th of August. So it's basically like pretty much not even 12 months. It's about like 7-8 months apart at max. So pretty tight deadline they were working on, and given that they haven't had a lot of experience making games like this before, it showed. They had very weird in-game mechanics that felt out of place and not finished. If you can get on the bike thing that you can drive around in Star Wars, which was a nice addition, but then you couldn't aim at people and shoot while driving it, which was weird. But at that point in gaming, you kind of expect that to be a thing that you can do in open world games, but you couldn't do it. I know they've added that later in a patch. You couldn't carry your guns up the ladders and stuff, which felt weird, especially for an open world game. You feel like you would need that kind of freedom. They fixed that in post too, but yeah, there was a lot of in-game mechanics that felt unfinished and kind of missing, that they did fix eventually. I mean, that's what he's saying here. He was saying the game had a few items that still needed to be polished, and they were polished and debugged in the early weeks, but it did affect sales volume. So of course, so they have been doing this whole strategy of shipping unfinished games and polishing them up in the weeks after launch or months after launch has been their strategy all along. And this is the game that finally made them learn that it doesn't work anymore, because people are tired of having to play games that are not finished, especially when it comes to single player open world adventure games, right? And it can work for something like an online player. It could work. It did work for Ghost Recon Wildlands. No, Breakpoint. It worked for Breakpoint. Breakpoint was a shitty game when it launched, but somehow they fixed it in the months after launch, and they managed to somewhat salvage it a little bit. But that's because it has an online component. It's a co-op game, ultimately. You can play it single player, but it is a co-op game at heart. But something like Ubisoft, Star Wars Outlaws or Avatar was a pretty polished game. They look good, but again, it felt a bit shallow. Same with Star Wars Outlaws. It in addition to the shallow gameplay and really garbage AI, they had a lot of technical issues. And people, with increased price points for games now, people are more wary of where they're gonna spend their money on. So if they see a game that's shipping with issues and not ready, they're not gonna put their money on it. So it's as simple as that. So and it didn't work for Star Wars, and Star Wars is a big IP, and even though that's the case, people will still call you out now, because the expectation is, if you're paying more money now for games, you need to be able to play it in a good state from day one. So That's the issue alone, and they need to go back and I mean they did eventually learn that lesson and then delayed AC Shadows, and when Shadows finally launched, it was a much polished game than it would have been if they launched it earlier. Let's be honest. So they did learn, but you knowing Ubisoft, they're probably gonna fall back to the old ways in a couple of more years. Who knows? I don't know. I hope they don't. I want. I really enjoy Ubisoft IPs, and I really like what they do, but they need to learn to get with the times and put out polished games because they are a AAA games developer. They can't be behaving like indies, you know. So I really hope that they learn and actually do better next time. They did delay the next Assassin's Creed game, some other games I from memory, but yeah, let's just hope that this continues to be a thing where they improve. But yeah, I mean these are kind of excuses. These are not excuses, but that's what he was giving as an excuse. If the game was pretty good, people would have played it because it would have been even better because it was released at a bad time when Star Wars TV show was doing really bad and people were saying shit about it. Imagine if this game was so good that people, oh my god, the game is doing better than TV shows now, would have gotten behind it. But the hard truth is this game was also bad, so people just didn't buy it. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the truth. Um, and I woke up this morning to this news: Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is getting a third-person update, but it is coming in December. After all this time, this game has been out. They're finally adding New Game Plus mode and also third person mode. It's bizarre. I mean, it's great that they're adding this, but would I actually go back and play this in third person mode? This game was all right, but it's one of those games that you play once and you forget. It's not something you're gonna go back and play again because it just wasn't that enjoyable to just go and play again. It was just like a forgettable Far Cry game with Pandora coat of paint. You know what I mean? So this third person update should have come with the game, to be honest, because it just made more sense to have it in third person. Even when they like first announced this whole game, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, and showed the gameplay, and when I saw that it's in first person, it was kind of weird to me because like, bro, like, come on, you're playing as a Navi in a Pandora, and you can't even see yourself. I mean, it's missed opportunity to live that fantasy. It just makes more sense when you can see your character. But if you could customize your character in a world like this, because that plays into the fantasy of being in this world. Because ultimately, that's what this is. It's a fantasy world. It's not even real world. So it felt weird. It just felt weird. It didn't make sense. You know, it didn't make sense. You know, if it was a game like Indiana Jones where they made it first person, it kind of makes sense why that's first person when you play the game. It makes sense. And there's not a lot of customization that you can do with Indiana Jones. It's a very iconic character with one specific outfit. Although you can do disguises in that game, but it just didn't make sense. Now they're finally adding third person. It's very, I mean, I guess this goes back to the fact that they would have had to rush this game out so they can work on Star Wars to be shipped out in the next 7 months after release of this. And now they finally have time to, work on the stuff that they couldn't before launch for this title. It just feels like such a messy situation at Ubisoft, to be honest. I really hope that they get their shit together. Oh, and they yeah, there's been some quality of life updates, including revamp Hunter Guide smooth 40 FPS mode, and yeah, cool. But yeah, these kind of things should have been like should have been there from day one, to be honest, or at least you know, um, like soon after, like it should have been like a patch soon after the game at least. New Game Plus only coming now. Like it's not even coming now. It's coming in December. This game released in 2024, dude. Anyway, that's my rant on Ubisoft stuff today. I think I'm gonna call it here. It's a weird time to be a Ubisoft fan, if I'm honest. They have a lot of questions to answer for a lot of. They're going through a lot of changes at the moment. Um, as you know, they have this whole separate division that they created that's going to be not under, but in cooperation with Tencent, Assassin's Creed and Ghost Recon and the Division or something. Anyway, all their big IPs now being partially funded by Tencent because honestly they're losing money. They need that money. So I'm not sure how it's going to affect the games moving on. It will be interesting to see. So yeah, let's see. We don't really know what's going to happen next. We just know there's a lot of delays in their games at the moment. So, but let's see. Hopefully they come out good and they can bounce back and then be the Ubisoft they used to be. I remember a time when Ubisoft was GOAT. I don't know if they'll ever get there again, but hey, one can hope.